Mr. President, I want to speak on the bill. We're going to have a vote somewhere around midday tomorrow on this bill. This senator comes to this issue of drilling for oil off of our coast with a long history. Ever since I was a young congressman, I've been fighting to keep oil rigs off of Florida's coast. And now it's especially important at this time as we have a new administration coming in that took a public position in the election, declaring the president-elect's intent to open up additional areas off the coast to oil drilling. So the package that we are going to consider tomorrow is an enhancement of just exactly that goal. And I want to point out to the Senate why this is not in the interest of our country. Now, first of all, we are dealing with a law that we passed about 5 years ago with an acronym of Go Mesa, which opened up for the first time oil revenues that came from federal waters to be shared with the Gulf states. Primarily, we were doing this in the interest of Louisiana because Louisiana had been hit so hard by Hurricane Katrina, and of which there was the need to restore a lot of those marshes. And this was another way of getting revenue to the state of Louisiana. At the same time, that bill was passed. It enhanced a law that we had passed with my former colleague, Senator Mel Martinez, back in the 2006 time frame, that kept the oil drilling off of Florida in the Gulf and kept it off, and it is in law, and it's the only place of the outer continental shelf where it is in law that you cannot drill up through the year 2022. I want to point out for the historical record why that is so and why this bill that we're considering tomorrow is not in the interest of the country. This area in yellow is the Gulf of Mexico off of Florida. This is Florida, the peninsula, the Keys. This is the Gulf Coast of Florida. Over here is Pensacola. All of that area in yellow is off limits to drilling up to the year 2022. Why? Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize what happened to Florida's economy back in the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The oil got as far as Pensacola. The spill was over here off of Louisiana. It got to the beaches of Pensacola, some to Destin, some tar balls to Panama City, until the wind started sending it back the other way. But what happened to Florida's tourism industry on its Gulf Coast for an entire season? The tourists thought there was oil on our beaches, and tourists did not come for an entire season all the way down to Marco Island, Naples, all of these beautiful, sugary white sand beaches, including Northwest Florida beaches, didn't come because they thought there was oil there. Now, that didn't just affect the airlines and the hotels. It affected the dry cleaners and the restaurants and all of this largest industry in Florida, which is the tourism industry. That's one reason. Another reason is there are so many of the bays and estuaries along this Gulf Coast where the critters are hatched that supply the fish stocks for the entire Gulf. And of course, there are stocks that are hatched here that migrate out into the other oceans. But there was a third reason. And that reason is that all of this area to the east of this line, in other words, 125 miles off of Panama City, 235 miles off of Tampa Bay, even further off of Naples, all of that is the largest testing and training area for the United States military in the world. And the Department of Defense has issued 2 letters under the signature of 2 Republican secretaries of defense saying that any oil-related activities here would be incompatible with our testing and training mission, this being the largest one in the United States. Now, that's why we don't have drilling there. And you will hear the proponent of the bill will say, well, we've exempted this part. We've exempted it not only because it's off limits in law, but what they are doing for the rest of the Gulf Coast is almost doubling the revenue sharing that would go to the states, the Gulf states, and thereby giving the incentive all the more for the state governments to want to have the drilling off of their coast, regardless of the United States military, regardless of the economic engine of Florida, regardless of the very delicate environment. But there's more. As a matter of fact, the bill before us would offer revenue sharing to states. Now, mind you, this is drilling in federal waters, that any revenue would typically be to the federal government. As a matter of fact, it's estimated by CBO that it is a loss of $7 billion to the U.S. Treasury. And that would also be available for the states on the Atlantic. Here's Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, and on up on the Atlantic coast. Now, I brought this chart to show not only the Gulf area off of Florida and the military testing and training ranges, but look at the military testing and training ranges off of the Atlantic coast. If it's incompatible here, are not we going to hear, as we have heard from some of the Department of Defense, that it's going to be incompatible in the Atlantic region? And so I want to urge that not only have we been battling to keep our coastal environments and beaches clean and unpolluted, that's not the only argument. The argument is also the argument of keeping our national security tested and trained in the most sophisticated weapons and training for the best military in the world. Now, this senator is a senior member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. There's a reason that we do not have oil rigs out here. First of all, in the state of Florida, we have Tyndall Air Force Base at Panama City. That's where they are training our pilots, the F-22s. At Eglin Air Force Base near Fort Walton Beach, that's where about half of the United States Air Force training and the other services, the Navy as well as the Air Force, are training their pilots for the F-35 that is now being cycled in to be the workhorse of our fighters. The United States Navy, which will have F-35s, but presently has the F-15s, F-18s, they will fly a squadron into Key West Naval Air Station. They'll be there for a week or two, and when they lift off from the runway at Boca Chica Key, in 2 minutes, they can be over restricted airspace, not having to spend a lot of time and fuel to get to the area of restriction for their testing and training. And so the Department of Defense has said you simply cannot have oil rigs operating in an area where we are testing these very sophisticated weapon systems that we need a lot of space. This is from this location down here, some 300 miles, as well as the training that goes on. So it's not just for a benefit of our military, it's key to our national defense. We have watched the tar balls wash up on the beaches. We've seen the sugary white sands of Pensacola Beach be completely black, covered from oil. We saw the harm that was done not only to the local businesses that catered to tourists, such as the hotels, the restaurants, the attractions, all the ancillary businesses, as the dry cleaners, the real estate firms. To put it into perspective, this is for our state of Florida, a $50 billion industry that oils the engine of our economy. We're talking about generating some $700 million in sales tax revenue for the state, and it helps support more than 450,000 jobs throughout the state. And so, why would you risk destroying a state's economy as well as our military preparation? It's not like that we don't have other places that we want to produce oil. Think of the oil shale that has been tapped to in the Dakotas, in Oklahoma, in Texas, that is not producing at maximum capacity. And so it is emblazoned on our memories as Floridians, the image of the hazmat crews in those hazmat suits and the Coast Guard vessels skimming off the water just 6 years ago. Our fishermen and our businesses, they certainly haven't forgotten their own losses that amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars. And so if the new administration and if the oil industry wants to have a fight on this issue, well, they certainly have one. This senator is going to continue to try to keep the oil rigs off the state of Florida with everything that I have. for all of the reasons that I have stated. And I would commend to our colleagues, when we vote tomorrow, beware of all of the effects of almost doubling the revenue for the Gulf Coast states of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, which is at the heart of what is behind this particular bill that we're going to vote on. But beware also, there are hidden messages in this revenue sharing, and it strikes at the heart of what we've been trying to protect here: environment, our economy, and our United States military preparedness. Mr. President, I yield the floor.